I'd like to welcome all of you to a special session we prepared for Indian and other international CAs who are interested in achieving their Canadian CPA. My name is Michael Levy. I'm a co-director of the PASS program. You'll be hearing shortly from my partner, Ira Walfish, who's also a co-director of the program. I welcome people to ask questions throughout the session. I know you're going to have many questions, and I'd be delighted to answer them, and I'm sure my partner will also be very happy to answer them. Let me begin by just showing you a slide that I think encapsulates what it's like to get your Canadian CPA. If I were to tell you that it's a walk in the park to get your Canadian CPA, I'd be lying to you. So I'll be entirely honest with you. This is a challenging exam. It takes persistence, discipline, very hard work, but it's a very doable exam. There's no question that anybody who is, I'll be blunt with you, anybody who is smart enough to get a CA in India, where you've got single-digit pass rates, is certainly capable of getting a Canadian CPA. But it takes patience, persistence, discipline, and a really good attitude. With that, it's a very doable exam. So let's take a look now at the agenda. I'm going to start by describing the CPA program and the CFE. We'll then talk about some critical changes that are taking place to the CPA program in 2025, which could have a huge impact on Indian CAs. We'll then talk about preparing for the CFE, both in terms of learning how to write cases, as well as preparing for technical. When we get to part 4, I'm going to turn the virtual floor over to my partner, Ira Walfish, and Ira will talk about the PASS CP program for Indian students that PASS has prepared. We're the only organization in Canada that actually produced a program specifically tailored to the needs of Indian CAs. We've been training Indian CAs since 2012. So we have a really, really good understanding of what it takes for an Indian CA to make it through their CPA exams. And we designed that program accordingly. Ira will describe it to you in detail when we get to part 4. He'll also go over the schedules. He'll show you just 2 or 3 testimonials from very happy students who took the PASS course and went on to succeed on the CFE. He'll talk about registration with PASS and fees. He'll just spend a few minutes on that. He'll also talk about registering with CPA provincial institutes. In addition to registering with PASS, you would also need to register with the Provincial Institute or the CPA Western School of Business. Ira will talk about that when he gets to part 8. We're only going to spend very little time on immigration. I know there are some people from India here, so we'll spend literally 2 minutes on immigration. The reason we're not going to spend more than 2 minutes on immigration is I want to make it very clear, neither Ira nor I is an expert on immigration. Quite to the contrary, we know almost nothing about immigration. Our expertise is passing the CPA exams. We know the CP well. We know the CPA process well. We don't know immigration well. So Ira will spend a couple of minutes on immigration, but then he will give you a contact of a professional consultant with whom you can consult if you have any questions. Ira will not, although we're happy to field questions on anything we talk about, the one exception is part 9. We will not field any questions on immigration because I would end up giving you wrong information because neither Ira nor I has the expertise. We're hoping to have a student in part 10, a former student of PASS, who will share with you his experience in preparing for the exam and succeeding on the CPA. There's nothing like hearing from an actual student. And then finally, in part 11, Ira will give you contact information in case you want to contact us after the session. Many people won't think of all their questions today, and then tomorrow they're going to wake up and have questions. So we're going to give you contact information for contacting PASS. So let's begin with the CPA program and the CP. I'm going to start by describing the basic program that a typical Canadian CPA would need to undertake in order to get their CPA. And then I'll show you the parts of the program from which you as an Indian CA would be exempt from. A typical Canadian student is required to take 2 modules, one called Core 1 that focuses on financial accounting, and another called Core 2, which focuses mainly on management accounting. And then they have to take 2 elective modules, and they can choose. They can choose tax, they can choose finance, they can choose performance management, they can choose assurance. So they have to take 2 of those 4 topics, and they have to take an exam at the end of each of these modules. Then they have to go on to Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Capstone 1 does not involve taking an exam. It simply involves working on a big business case as part of a group and then doing a mock presentation for a board of directors. And Capstone 2 simply involves writing old CP cases for practice and having them marked. So there's no exam at the end of Capstone 1 or 2. As an Indian CA, you do not need to take the Core 1 and Core 2 module, nor the elective module. So that's 4 exams from which you're exempt. However, you are expected to have the knowledge that would have been covered in these exams, and that is why PASS has built in a very strong technical component so that you will have the knowledge that you would otherwise have obtained in taking these modules. You also don't need to do Capstone 1 or 2. You can go directly to the CP. Now, is it a good idea to take Capstone 1 or 2 voluntarily? That is an important question that Ira will address later on in this presentation. The 2024 CP will be May 28th to May 30th, and then there'll be a second CP September 10th to 12th. Generally, in past years, and also in 2024, there are 2 sittings, one at the end of May and one in September. So just in diagram form, you can see that you've got the technical modules, Core 1 and 2, and the 2 electives. Then you've got Capstone 1 and 2. Indian CAs are exempt from both. You go straight to the CP. Before I go any further, are there any questions? And if you have questions, it would be great if you would ask them orally. I'll be monitoring the chat box, but I prefer oral questions if you don't mind. Any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, we will continue. Let me give you an overview now of the CP. The CP is a case-based exam. The cases are far larger than an Indian CA exam, and they deal with multiple issues. When I say multiple issues, I mean multiple competencies. So in one case, you could be addressing assurance and financial accounting and finance all in one case. So unlike many other exams where you write an exam in accounting or you write an exam in audit, doesn't work that way here. The exams are integrated. They integrate a number of different competencies. The time for the cases range from 70 minutes to as long as 5 hours. And when I give you a breakdown of the CP, it's a 3-day exam. When I give you a breakdown of the 3 days, you'll see how the length of the exam correlates with each of the days. On a short case, you may have to write 5 or 6 pages. You may have to read 5 or 6 pages. A typical case, would have even though it may only be 70, 80, or 90 minutes, has quite a few pages. On a long case, say the 5-hour case, you can have 50 to 20 pages that you need to read. So you have to obtain the ability and you have to learn how to absorb a fair amount of information within a fairly short period of time. And that's one of the skills that we work very hard to impart to you. And that's one of the skills that you will gain through practice, through writing practice cases. The only way to learn to do this is through practice case writing. The cases typically have about approximately 1 page, which is the main body, and it's followed by a number of appendices. So most of the information that you need to utilize to write the case is in the appendices. Here is an example of the main body of one of our cases. And as you can see, it's just 1 page. And then if I were to share with you the whole case, you would see a number of appendices behind the first page. Or following the first page, that might be a better way to put it. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that the CP is 3 days long. So let's talk about what's tested on each day. Day 1, you have 1 large 4-hour case, and I'm going to refer to it as a comp. That's really not the official name. It's basically meant to test your big picture skills. Your ability to deal with big picture issues like strategy and big operational issues, not meant to be a very technical day. Day 2 is one large 5-hour case. It's referred to as a roll comp, and I'll explain why it's a roll comp in just a few minutes. On day 3, you would be writing 3 shorter cases. Each case is 70 to 90 minutes long, and it has to add up to 4 hours, okay? So what they could do is they could give you 3 cases that are 80 minutes long, or they could give you one case that's 80, another that's 90, another that's 70. It just has to add up to 4 hours. These shorter cases are often referred to as multi-cases. The reason they're referred to as multi-cases is they test many different competencies in the same case. So you can have, I mentioned earlier, you can have assurance, finance, management accounting, a whole bunch of competencies tested in one case. That's why they're called multis. And all the cases test more than one competency. It's just that the multis typically really test a lot of competencies, as you'll see in a moment. The CPA covers 6 competencies. So I keep using the term competency, and some of you may have had a hard time grasping what that is. By competency, I mean the following. There are 6 competencies: audit and assurance, financial reporting, management accounting, finance, taxation, strategy, and governance. So when I say that every case has more than one competency, I mean it has more than one of these 6 subjects. Let's now take a look at each day individually. Day 1, as I mentioned before, is one large 4-hour case. It's a big business case. It's based on the case used in Capstone 1. In Capstone 1, you're doing a big group business project with a group of students, and you're working on a fictionalized company, a pretend company. And what happens when you get into day 1 of the CPA is you're dealing with the same company that students were dealing with on Capstone 1, but now the company is a number of years ahead. We fast forward a few years, and they're now facing new operational and strategic issues that you need to deal with. So given that day 1 of the CPA is based on Capstone 1, some of you may be wondering, but I'm not required to go to Capstone 1. So let's say I don't go to Capstone 1 voluntarily. What happens to me? How do I write day 1? So let me put your fears aside. Let me ameliorate any fears you have. We recognize at PASS that the vast majority of Indian CAs do not go to Capstone 1 because they're not required to. So what we do is we prepare you for Capstone 1. We give you all of the information you would have needed with regard to the Capstone 1 case that you didn't work on as part of a group, so that you're on fair ground with those who went, so that you're entirely familiar with the case. So we will make sure to cover that gap. You have nothing to worry about. It's marked separately from days 2 and 3. And you simply, so bottom line is, say you pass day 1, but you don't pass day 2 and 3, you don't need to do day 1 again. Hopefully you will pass it. It's just pass or fail, no mark. And as I said before, it's not meant to be very technical. You're dealing a lot with strategy, governance, SWOT. It's big picture issues. It's not meant to test nitty-gritty technical. Day 2 of the case is one 5-hour case, sometimes referred to as the roll comp. That's not the official term. It's a term that we use.
Sorry, I have one question, if you can.
Sure, by all means.
Yeah, on day 1 of the case, it will be announced earlier that what case will come in the exam, or it will be surprise for us to go in the exam that what is the Capstone 1 case which we will be attempting. We will know before that, or it will be new for us?
Yes, you will know beforehand. What happens is you'll get a letter from your institute asking you which case you would like to write, because what they typically do is they typically have 2 cases available on day 1. One is a repeat of a case that was given in a previous year, and that's really good for repeat writers. And then there's a new case, which first-time writers typically write. So if you're a first-time writer, you would choose the case for first-time writers. So it definitely will not be a surprise. Any other questions, guys? I welcome questions. Okay, so let's move on then. Day 2 of the CP is a 5-hour case. And as I said a moment ago, it's a roll comp. The case will have financial accounting and or management accounting on it. And everybody has to address the financial accounting and or management accounting. Everybody writing the exam needs to address this. Now, in all likelihood, you'll have both financial and management accounting. Even though they only have to test one, in recent years, every year they've tested both. So there's an extremely high probability that everybody writing the roll comp will have to deal with financial accounting and management accounting. Now, in addition to financial and management accounting, you're going to have to deal with one more competency. We said before there were 6 competencies. You'll have to deal with one more competency, but you'll have a choice. You have a choice of 4 different roles. You can choose assurance. When I said audit here, it really means assurance, tax, performance management, or finance. So let's say I choose assurance. If I choose assurance, I will deal with financial accounting and management accounting. All the rest of the requirements that I need to address will relate to assurance. If the person sitting next to me chose finance, that individual will have to deal with financial accounting and management accounting. All of the rest of her requirements will be in the area of finance. So the maximum number of competencies that you will deal with on day 2 is 3 competencies: financial accounting, management accounting, and one of these 4 areas. That will be the maximum number of competencies you need to deal with. When you get to day 3, I mentioned that we call it the multi, because that's a day where you deal with many competencies. So you've got 3 cases, as I mentioned earlier, that range from 70 to 90 minutes and add up to 240 minutes, 4 hours. Each case contains 4 to 6 competencies. So if we go back to the competencies, you can have on a multi, a 90-minute case that includes all 6 of these competencies. It's generally going to be anywhere from 4 to 6 competencies. So there are more competencies tested on day 3 than on day 2. Everyone writes the same cases. Unlike day 2, you do not choose a particular role. Everybody writes exactly the same cases. Day 2 and day 3 are marked together. These are the technical days of the CFE, and they're marked together. So if you're not successful, it's not an all or nothing proposition. Say, as I mentioned earlier, you fail day 1, you simply repeat day 1, assuming you pass day 2 and 3. Let's say you fail day 2 and 3, but you passed day 1, you would just rewrite day 2 and 3, but you wouldn't have to rewrite day 1. So if you can have, hopefully you'll have a full pass, but it's not all or nothing. You can have what you might call a partial pass, where you either pass just day 1 or you pass just day 2 and 3.
Hi, Michael. I have a question
Sure,
on
by all
day 2.
means.
Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all.
So basically, you mentioned on day 2 that you have to choose a competency. So apart from the case, which is like 1-page main body, you have appendices for that you mentioned. So within those appendices, those roles are clearly specified. Which one do you have to choose?
Excellent question. Very good question. The way that the day 2 case works, and I don't want to get into too much detail today, but I'll just give you a general idea so I can answer your question. The way that the day 2 case works is they have pages that are entitled role requirements. And then they will have a separate page or page and a half for each role. So it actually will say explicitly assurance role requirements, finance role requirements, tax role requirements, PM role requirements. You will only read that page or that page and a half that has the requirements for your role. That will be before the appendices. Then they will give you appendices. There will be a number of what I call common appendices that have most of the information you need to deal with financial accounting and management account issues. They're called common appendices because they're appendices that everybody needs to read, because everybody needs to address the financial accounting and management accounting requires. Then there will be a separate appendix for each of the roles. So if you've chosen assurance as your role, you will have a separate appendix called assurance that you will read. The person next to you doing finance will read the finance appendix. So it will be very, very clearly delineated what you need to read for your role. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
My pleasure. Any other questions? I know I always tell my students that they learn more from the questions than from anything else, because I can't read your mind. So if there are things you're thinking, please don't hesitate to ask.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
One more question.
Sure. Hi, Atul.
So with regard to day two, again, is there any specific competency which is preferred to be selected? Like most of my friends say, they always prefer like assurance instead of performance management or finance. My role currently is in the finance side. So I was planning to select either performance management or finance.
Sure. I would not agree that any one competency is easier than another. So I certainly do not recommend to all my students to take assurance. I recommend that they take what they think they're strongest at. So I've had many students who work in the finance area, and their finances, I'll be honest, better than mine. It's excellent. And they haven't done assurance in many, many years. I don't recommend they do assurance. On the other hand, I have other students who work in assurance and are very comfortable with assurance, and I tell them to take assurance. So again, there's no one competency that's easier or harder. It really depends on your own strengths. Sometimes I have a student who really isn't sure what they're stronger in. So what I typically have them do is take a look at some past day two cases, and they look at the case as well as the solution, and they get a pretty good idea of which one, by looking particularly at the solution, which one they'd have a better shot at. But for some students, it's a no-brainer not to take assurance because they haven't done it in years and their finance is excellent. You know, there's pros and cons to different roles. For example, assurance is less time constrained because there's less number crunching. On the other hand, there's more subjectivity in the marking of assurance. Finance, a lot more number crunching, therefore you're more time constrained, but it's more black and white. If you know what you're doing, you're guaranteed to do well. There's very little subjectivity. So it would be wrong for anybody to say that one is easier than the other. It's really very much a personal thing. We often assist our students with this. I very frequently get calls from students who aren't sure what to do, and depending on their situation, I do my best to advise them. Have I answered your question at all?
Yes, you did. Thanks, Mike.
My pleasure. And any other questions? Okay, so let's continue then. Everyone in Canada writes the same CPA exam. So it doesn't matter where you live. You've got 3 tries to pass. The exam is written on computer, not by hand. You use Word for the qualitative portion of your answer and Excel for the number crunching. However, the actual exam itself is not in soft copy, it's in hard copy, which I think many students like. So you can physically mark up the exam as you read through it. It's more or less an open book exam because you have access to an electronic handbook. And let me explain what the handbook is. The handbook is a book put out by CPA Canada that encapsulates all of the financial accounting standards, so how to account for different areas, as well as the assurance standards. And students find it very helpful to have this on their exam. As long as you know your way around the handbook and you know where to find things, many students will go into their handbook during the exam to find the guidance. So having the handbook in front of you will be extremely useful. Now, you also have a copy in electronic form of the Tax Act, which has all the Canadian tax rules. If I'm entirely honest with you, I'll tell you that it's highly unlikely that will be helpful to you, because I've never seen the equivalent Indian Tax Act or whatever you call the tax rules in India. Can't say I've ever seen them, but I can tell you that in Canada, the Tax Act is almost unreadable. There'll be literally 90 word sentences. So the Tax Act you probably will not be referring to during the exam, but the handbook that includes the accounting and assurance standards, that you'll find very helpful on the exam. Now, one nice thing about Canada is it's a big country, but it doesn't matter in which of the 10 provinces you write the exam. You can practice in any other province without taking any further exams. So, you know, my late father, for example, trained to be a CA in Montreal, in Quebec. And then we moved to Toronto many years ago, and he didn't have to do anything. All he did was register with the Ontario Institute instead of the Quebec Institute, what they called the Quebec Order, and then he was able to practice in Ontario. There was absolutely nothing more to do. So you don't necessarily need to know where you're going to live for the rest of your life when you write this exam. Any questions before I move on?
Hi, Michael. Atul again.
Sure.
I have read an article where CPA Ontario is now planning to separate itself from other institutes, I mean, other provinces. So do you have any idea like how it would impact students who are appearing for CPA here? Like, can they still go ahead and like practice in British Columbia or Alberta?
Yeah, it should not be an issue. One thing they have made very, very clear, Ira and I attended, a Zoom meeting with them recently, and they made it very, very clear that there will still be just one exam, and what they call unification will continue. In other words, you will still be able to practice in any province. No change is going to take place with regard to education. Okay. The issues that Ontario was having with CPA Canada really don't have very much to do with education. What they have more to do with transparency. CPA Ontario ends up contributing a lot of money to CPA Canada, and they're upset with CPA Canada because they just don't share enough information with them. But it has nothing to do with the education process, and they've made it clear that will continue to be one exam, so that the designation can continue to be portable across Canada.
Thanks.
What I'd like to talk about now are some important changes to the CPA program in 2025. And this is something that really could affect Indian CAs. The CPA education program is supposed to be completely revamped in 2025. And they are planning to remove the CFE and replace it with other exams. They're also planning to change the competency map significantly. The competency map is basically a syllabus that tells you what you are responsible to know for the exam. And what they want to do with the new competency map is they want to add a whole bunch of items that are what I would call non-traditional accounting type topics. They want to put much more emphasis on data analytics, organizational behavior, including sustainability, including ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And again, I think that's not particularly to the advantage of most Indian CAs, as if I'm not mistaken, these are not a big part of the Indian exam. So these are not areas that many people would have been prepared for. The exact nature of the exams is still in the air. We were just talking on Friday with the director of education for one of the big four firms in Canada, excuse me. And she was saying that there's still a tremendous amount of debate taking place as to what these exams will look like. So they haven't pinned them down at all. So I'll be honest with you, it's like a black box right now, very much an unknown. There may still be a CPA in 2025. As a matter of fact, there likely will be, but it's not clear who will be eligible to write it. It's possible that only students who started the Core 1 and Core 2 and elective exams in 2024 will be able to write it. I have no idea whether Indian CAs will be able to write it, and I don't think anybody would be able to get an answer right now. Will there still be an MOU with India? Your guess is as good as mine. The chances of getting an answer on that now, I think, is close to zero. And unless Vivek knows something I don't know, and if he does, he's welcome to speak up. I don't think any decision's been made on that yet. Even if there is an MOU, at this stage, it's impossible to know what it will entail because we don't even know what the exam process looks like. So if we don't know what the exam process looks like, it's impossible to know whether you'll only have to write one exam or two exams or three exams. So to make life simple and safe, if you're a typical CPA or CA who doesn't like risk, I think accountants tend to be risk averse, right? I think fighter pilots probably are willing to take more risk than a typical accountant. If you don't like risk, my strong recommendation is get the exam under your belt in 2024 before the exam process changes. That way you don't have to deal with the unknown. And you've got two opportunities to do it, either May or September. Ira will talk later about how much time you need to study so you can decide whether May or September makes sense. Any questions before I move on to the importance of case writing and technical? Okay, so let's take a look then at this next subject, case writing and technical. You can see now from my presentation of what the CPA looks like that case writing is, learning how to write cases is absolutely essential to pass, because there's no short answer questions here. There's no multiple choice questions. It is 100% cases, as we said earlier, ranging from 70 minutes to 5 hours. So you must learn how to write cases effectively to pass this exam. Now, is it rocket science to learn how to write cases? No. Anybody who's smart enough to pass the Indian CA exam can learn how to write cases. However, does it take a tremendous amount of effort and a tremendous amount of practice? Certainly. At the end of the day, I've rarely met somebody who could write 2 cases and pick up the skill. You have to write many cases, and typically you have to write cases over many months in order to be able to learn how to write cases effectively. That's why the earlier you start your practicing, the better off you are. We've had some students who started as much as a year earlier. We have students who registered already this September for next September's exam. Now, do you really need a full 12 months? No. Ira will go over with you later how much time you need. You probably can make do with 6 months, 7th month, 8 months. But the longer you have, the better off you are, simply because practice is the only way to get good at case writing. And also, one of the things I've learned over the years, Ira and I have been in this business now for over 25 years. As I said, we've been teaching Indian CA since 2012, but we started our training course back in 1989, which is a long time ago. So one of the things that we learned is different people take different amounts of time to learn how to write cases effectively. Okay, so some people, it might click after 3 months. Some people, it might click after 6 months. It really, really varies. You have no way of knowing how long it will take for you, because I've met extremely intelligent people, both Indian CAs as well as Canadians, who took a long time to learn the skill, and less intelligent people who took less time. So you have no way of knowing how long it's going to take you. That's why the earlier you start, the better. What's nice about this process is you don't have to learn all of your technical before you write cases. I always tell my students that they can be writing cases while they're learning their technical. What about technical? There is a technical foundation that you certainly need. The best case writing skills in the world won't get you through this exam if you don't have a technical foundation. The 2 biggest areas that are tested on the CP are financial accounting and management accounting. So I would obviously spend a fair amount of time on these 2 topics. However, I would not spend the same amount of time on both topics. Financial accounting is a far bigger topic. It includes ASPE and IFRS. ASPE, some of you may not have even heard of. ASPE are accounting standards for private enterprises, non-public companies, that were designed specifically in Canada, and therefore an Indian CA typically would not be familiar with. IFRS, some of you, or many of you, are probably familiar with. Financial accounting takes up an inordinate amount of time simply because the body of knowledge is very large. So this will probably be one of the topics that you spend the most amount of time on, and a much lesser amount of time on management accounting. The nice thing about management accounting, aside from the fact that the body of knowledge is much less than financial, is that it's no different than in India. We don't do a break even any differently in Canada than in India. We don't do contribution margin analysis any differently in Canada than in India. Now, another competency that will be somewhat challenging for an Indian CA is tax. So financial accounting and tax are the technical areas that probably take up the most amount of time. Financial accounting is a much larger body of knowledge, but tax is something you won't know, because the Canadian tax is very different than Indian tax. However, I do have some good news for you. Unless you choose tax as your depth area on day 2, tax is not tested in a great deal of depth. So you don't need to know all the fancy tax planning under Canadian law, unless you choose tax as your depth area on day 2, which hardly any Indian students ever do. You simply need to know the basic compliance. As I said, virtually no tax planning, but you need to know things like, how do I compute taxable income for a corporation? How do I compute taxable income for an individual? What's deductible? What's taxable? So it's really not a tremendous amount of knowledge that you need to acquire. For a typical Canadian student, they would spend a lot more time on financial accounting as long as they're not choosing tax as their depth area. Because you never learned Canadian tax, you would probably be spending a fair amount of time on financial accounting as well as tax. What about the other competencies? When it comes to audit, by that I mean assurance, finance, and governance, a large part of what you need to know is going to come from writing cases. When it comes to assurance, a very big part of what they test would include things like planning of an auditor review, procedures, dealing with weaknesses and controls. All of that you learn from case writing. It's not, there isn't a great body of knowledge required to plan an audit or come up with procedures or deal with controls. That comes from writing cases and, quite honestly, to a large degree, using common sense. Now, there are some areas you're going to need to learn where you're going to have to go through the past notes and learn them. So, for example, you have to learn about reporting. You have to learn about what are the rules if I want to rely on an internal auditor. So there's going to be certain areas you're going to have to read and study from the past notes, but a large amount of what you need to know is going to be derived from practice case writing. Finance, the body of knowledge, very, very narrow, because you don't need, unless you choose finance as your depth area, you don't need to have a tremendous amount of knowledge. And also finance on the CP, if you don't choose it as your depth area, primarily number crunchy. Yeah, there is some qualitative, like they'll give you a number of financing alternatives, and you'll analyze, the pros and cons of each one, or a number of investment alternatives, and you'll look at the pros and cons of each one. But a large part of finance is numerical, doing, say, a projected cash flow, or doing a business valuation, or a net present value calculation. So body of knowledge, very narrow. And again, you should have that. I think most Indian CAs have that knowledge. Even if you worked in assurance, you needed to know some amount of finance back in India to study for the exams. Governance is basically very straightforward. For the most part, it's just pure common sense. We just use the short form governance. It's really called strategy and governance. So you might be dealing with, is the company achieving their mission? That, of course, would be common sense. You just might have some general business issues to deal with. That, again, would be common sense. So very, very little technical studying necessary for governance, almost none. Any questions before I turn over the virtual floor to Ira?
Michael, I have one question.
Please.
So for role comp, you mentioned about choosing an additional competency. Obviously, there is about taxation that seems to be hard for Indian CAs, and the options are about assurance or about what you call finance. But what about strategy and governance? Is that an option too, viable option?
Good question. One of the options is PM, which stands for performance management. You've got 4 options. As you mentioned before, you've got assurance, tax, finance, and performance management. Performance management comprises management accounting as well as governance, as well as strategy and governance. So if you're strong at strategy and governance, and you're also strong at management accounting, performance management would be a good choice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions before I hand over the virtual floor to my partner, our Walfish?
Yeah, I have one question.
Please.
Regarding the last one, which you mentioned that it will be a combination of management accounting plus the governance. So management accounting is any which way is compulsory subject to be taken for CP. So it will be same thing covered under like both of the subjects. The portion will be same.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Management accounting is something that everybody will have to deal with in all likelihood. As I mentioned earlier, that they have to test everybody has to write requires dealing with financial and or management accounting. And in the last few years, it's always been both. So regardless of the role you choose, you will have management accounting to deal with. However, if you choose performance management, you will have additional management accounting to deal with, and they may also test it in a more sophisticated way. They expect you to be stronger at it if you've chosen PM. If you choose performance management, the acronym being PM, then they expect you to be really good at strategy and governance, and they expect you to be strong in management accounting. So yes, you will have additional management accounting in addition to what everybody had to deal with as part of the common requirements, and it may be a little harder. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Any other questions? Okay,
And
so
one follow-up question on
sure,
that, sorry.
sure.
So basically, if someone chooses performance management, then the technical binder that you provide covers the management account and governance topic at that level, which is sufficient for that, or do we need to like additional guidance on that?
Sure. I would say that it covers off the management accounting at the level, at a high enough level for both. Okay, because again, it's not even so much that you need to know more technical. Okay, basically, in our binder, we cover off all the topics you need to know, and those are the same topics whether you choose PM or not. They're just going to be tested potentially in harder scenarios. You see what I mean? So I would be comfortable saying that our management accounting and our binder would be good enough for both.
Thank you.
No problem. I see a question here. More clarity required in terms of MOU with ICI India and what benefits India gets under the MOU. Yeah. So at the very beginning of the session, what I said was there is a long process that Canadian students need to go through to get their CPA. They have to go attend 4 modules and write 4 exams. They also have to go to Capstone 1, where they work as part of a group and do a big business presentation, both in writing as well as orally. And then they go to Capstone 2, where they write prior CP cases. After going through all those hoops, they then move on to write the CP. They achieve their CPA. As an Indian CA, you go directly to the CP. So you don't have to write these 4 modules exams. You don't have to go to Capstone 1, and you don't even have to go to Capstone 2. Now, Capstone 2 happens to be very beneficial, so Ira will talk about how we've incorporated it into the past course. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, you're exempt from a lot of exams because of the MOU, and that's a huge benefit to you. I hope that answers the question. Any other questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn over the floor to Ira Wallfish.
Just so you understand, I think Michael basically said it, I'm just going to emphasize it. This MOU has been a huge win, in our opinion, for people from India. There's really only 2 countries in the world that can skip the entire process that Canadian students go through and just go directly to the final exam. And that's India and Pakistan. So people that come from, we get calls like this all the time, people who might come from England or Australia, who have similar standards, under IFRS and stuff like that. I don't know the logic in this, but they cannot do this. So they can have an accounting degree from Australia, they can have an accounting degree from England, and they get put into the process. Sometimes they give them off like a few of the exams, but they cannot go directly to the CFE. So for whatever reason, again, obviously we had no involvement in this, but it's been a very, very beneficial MOU, we believe, for people both from India and from Pakistan, and it is not the norm. It is really not the norm. Okay, let me just make sure I have my chat box. Okay. All right, so let me just, I'm just going to pick up, I guess, where Michael left off. So as Michael mentioned, we have a whole program specifically dedicated to students primarily from India. It also applies to students from Pakistan, but it's primarily from people from India. And as Michael also mentioned, we've been doing this for a lot of years, since 1989. We have been doing the PWC program across Canada for, I don't know, over 20 years probably. And we continue to do that. we've done courses within all of the 4 large firms, but the one that we run the entire program across Canada is PWC. Michael did very well when he wrote. You can see here he was a former gold medalist. That's good. That was basically top person, like in Ontario. And look, we're happy with the program. The bottom line is we feel it's working. People are passing. I'm now talking people from India who, you know, as everybody here knows, wrote a very different type of exam in India. And we're happy with it. Like I say, it's working. Okay, so, oops. All right. So as I said, I think we're the only ones that really designed a special course for people from India and I guess other international students. We knew right away when the whole MOU came into effect that it's a very different process. And we knew that because you don't really have a case writing background, that we are going to have to throw in as much as we could into the program. So what we did is, you can kind of look at this, it's a bit semantics, but you can look at it like 3 different parts. There's technical training, case writing, and personal counseling. Now, part of the studying, and by the way, please stop me if you have any questions along the way. Those were really good questions you were asking, Michael, so please, I don't want to be jealous of the questions. Please stop me if you have any questions. All right, so part of the program is self-study. Part of the program is formal instruction. Okay, what's self-study? Well, when you register, we give you a binder, a technical binder that Michael mentioned. It has all the 6 areas, and you start studying that binder and watching the videos. That is self-study. Number 2, we will give you some practice cases to write after you watch an introduction to case writing. You mark those on your own. I don't know how many people do them. We'll give you about 9 or 10. So the more case writing you do, the better. You're not handing those in. I don't know who does them, but we give them to everybody. The formal instruction is a bunch of stuff. Some of the technical that you could watch on video now, we will have live sessions for point B and point C. We will have live sessions for financial accounting and management accounting, live sessions over Zoom. Case writing, the cases you hand in, we will have take-ups. Those will be live sessions. We'll mark the case, we'll send it back, and there will be a take-up, a class where we debrief the case. We also have sessions that are called technique sessions. I won't get into these now, but they're not exactly technical, and they're not really case writing. They're just different good habits you should get into when you get into cases to help move you up the levels, which I realize doesn't really make sense to you now because you don't know what the levels are. That ties into the marking scheme. But the bottom line is these technique sessions are live sessions that we are teaching certain techniques. And then we have the personal counseling. So I'll explain that in a minute. So the overall picture, part of it is self-study and part of it is formal instruction. Any questions on any of that? Okay, so a couple of points. Some of this I've already said, but the technical study, as Michael mentioned, the biggest areas are financial accounting and management accounting. We have technical notes on all 6 areas. We give you videos on all 6 areas. We don't have time to cover everything live, like all 6 areas. So we restrict it to the big ones, financial accounting and management accounting. Some of the technical you've already learned from India, IFRS, but some of the technical will be new. As Michael mentioned, tax, ASPE, which is accounting rules for private companies in Canada. Some are identical to IFRS, but many are not. So you have to kind of learn that as well. So call it 50% of the program is really building up your technical skills. The case writing, obviously we're preparing you for all 3 days of the CFE. So you're writing cases, day 1, day 2, and day 3. We give you a whole binder. We have sessions on the take-up of the cases. And we have those technique sessions, if you look at the third point that I mentioned before, that are not really technical, they're really for the case writing component. If you want to see an example of a case take-up or a technical take-up, we have a couple on YouTube. You can really watch, and that will tell you exactly what we mean when we say a case take-up, which I know is not exactly clear until you really understand what case writing is. So I believe everyone's going to have a copy of this presentation. So, you know, you could just go to this, you don't have to write it down there or take a picture of it or whatever, it doesn't matter. You'll have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. You can look at, you can look this up and you can really see exactly what we do for the case take-up and for the technical take-up. What are the personal counseling sessions? People, very simple. For 3 of the cases that we get you to write and hand in, we set you up with the marker, and you'll have about a half an hour session, probably over Zoom, where the marker will go over the case with you. Normally, the markers mark the case and put comments on the case, what you did right, what you did wrong. In addition to that, for 3 sessions, we call them personal counseling, you'll have 3 sessions where the marker will sit down with you, okay, and go over the case. That's what we mean by personal counseling. All right. Is everybody good? Okay. Now, just a little more detail, Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. So, as Michael mentioned, you don't have to go to Capstone 1 and 2. It's actually optional. Hardly anybody goes from India. We don't recommend you go. We do have to teach you a few things about day 1, Capstone 1. But there's really 2 reasons we don't recommend you go to Capstone 1. One reason, I guess, is obvious, it's financial. Unless you really feel like paying, I don't know, $1,400 or whatever to go to Capstone 1. But there's a second reason that has nothing to do with the money. Even if it's free, I would say don't go. And that is because they are teaching things in Capstone 1 to Canadian students that do not apply to the CFE. Group work, oral presentations. Those are taught in Capstone 1. You don't need those for the CFE. I'm not saying they're not good skills, but you don't really need those for the CFE. Canadian students have no choice. They have to go to Capstone 1. So this becomes time consuming. And, you know, I guess if you tell me you have no limit on your time, okay, fine, then this reason won't apply to you. Most people have limits on their time and are busy, even working or not working, you're busy. So the problem is it's like an opportunity cost. You know, you're sitting in Capstone 1, Canadian students, again, have no choice, and they're spending, I don't know, 20 hours a week. Well, you could be spending that 20 hours writing cases, doing technical. That is way more useful than what you'll be doing in Capstone 1. So we do have to teach you a few things. Of course, it's built into the program. We teach you what we think we need to teach you to pass day 1 of the CFE, but we don't recommend you go to Capstone 1. Capstone 2 is a bit of a different story. That is simply practice case writing. That is useful. We have built that into the program. I'll show you that when I show you the pricing. We give you a choice, yes or no, for Capstone 2. Okay, so that is different. Any questions? Everyone good?
Ira, just one question. So in terms of the studying strategy, basically looking at the technical binder, looking at the videos, and then doing the cases, that would be the strategy? Or is it first looking at the videos, then technical binder, then?
Okay, okay, all right, it's an excellent question. Okay, and the answer is not so obvious. Okay, it's an excellent question. I will now say something that is not going to be obvious. It becomes a combined approach. You study the technical, and while you're studying the technical, you are writing cases. This is not like in university, where you go and study a chapter and then you write a test. You are not going to finish your technical before you write cases. Now, if you start early, yes, you can spend a month or two studying technical before you even practice your first case. No problem. But even then, when you practice your first case, you will be in situations where things will show up in cases and you have not studied that topic. So I don't know, let's take an example. Let's say you haven't studied foreign currency. You don't remember anything about foreign currency. Okay, you did it with IFRS. And by the way, foreign currency is very different, ASPE. So, okay, fine. You haven't studied it yet. You don't know foreign currency for private companies in Canada. You haven't done ASPE. You don't remember anything you did with foreign currency for IFRS. And all of a sudden you're writing a case and there's a foreign currency issue. Now what? Okay, you're not going to do very well in that foreign currency issue. You don't remember anything. But after you write the case, you'll then look at the solution. You'll then start to take notes on what showed up for foreign currency. And maybe then you'll say, you know what, maybe I'll now study foreign currency. It's on my brain. And now you'll study foreign currency. So it's true. When you wrote the case, you sat there for 10 minutes when you should have been writing foreign currency and you didn't know what to write. The problem is that you cannot predict what technical topics show up in cases. So as I'm saying, unless you have all the time in the world, okay, and you can study technical and finish all your technical first, which never happens, great, but it just doesn't work. You're studying the technical, you don't know what's going to show up in cases. That's the reason it's a combined approach. So yes, the long answer to your question is, it really is a combination of you're studying the technical, you're watching the videos, you're writing the cases, either marking on your own or handing them in, and attending the classes on the live online. That's the whole process.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering, because that was exactly my predicament. Because if I start doing the technical, like the case writing, I won't know many of the topics.
Happens
and
all,
how do I deal with that? Yeah.
Everybody is in the same, everybody is in the same boat. There is a, look, I'm not going to lie, there is a bit of an advantage. It is one of the reasons that Michael said, and it's true. You start a little earlier, then you have a little more time to do the technical before you write the cases. But even then, you will have to do a combined process. Now, you start later, like, I don't know, people who are writing in May, okay, if you want to write this exam in May, for example, and you start in November, December, you're going to be getting into cases very quickly. It is what it is, like, depending on when you start. But either way, it's a combined approach, which I know, like I'm saying, I know it's not an obvious point. Okay, so the classes we offer, people, we try and make it very flexible. Okay, we offer everything live online, Eastern Standard Time from Ontario. Now, the timing's not going to work if you're in India. I can tell you that. It's going to be IST time is going to be like, I don't know, 4 in the morning, 10.5 hours in advance. It may or may not work. I don't know. You might be busy one night. It may not. I don't care where you are. You're in Ontario. We run the class 7 p.m. until 9:30 p.m. or 10 o'clock. That'll be the latest. But 9:30, 10 o'clock p.m. Okay, you're not around that night. So that's fine. We record every class. So you just watch the video. We do run some classes, not all of them, but we run some sessions IST time. So in other words, we're running them twice. We're running them Eastern Standard Time and IST time. We record everything. It's totally flexible. The only difference between watching the recording and going in live online, you cannot ask a question to the recording. So if you have questions from the videos, Michael and myself answer questions all the time from students. You're basically going to email, WhatsApp, phone me or Michael and ask your question. That's it. That's the only difference. Okay, like we're videoing this session, same thing we do with all of our sessions, and then we upload the videos. So look, as I said before, the course is working. We're not changing it. It's pretty comprehensive. Okay, these are just some little statistics or whatever. It's big enough. And again, I would adjust it or change it if I thought there was an issue, but we don't think there's an issue. It's big enough. It's working. People are getting through, with no background whatsoever. for this exam in case writing, and they're getting through first time. So we're happy with it. Like I say, I'm not going to add to it. More than enough. Now, small point, I just need to explain this. If you register for September CFE, the website will make you choose one of two versions. We have version 1 and version 2. You will see that on our website. What's the difference? The only difference is that in version 1, we give 3 exams in January, February, March, and those same exams we give in July for version 2. We like version 1 better because you're writing cases earlier. So if you start now, you're going to choose version 1, hopefully. Unless you say to me, I'm so busy in January, February, March, I don't have time to write those cases, I'll write them in July. All we've done is create a second version to give you 2 choices when to write 3 of the exams. It's not a big deal. You can change, it doesn't matter. I don't have to know. You just have to select one of the 2. The rest of the program is identical. All the lectures, all the technical lectures, the binders, the material, everything is the same. The only difference between version 1 and 2 is when you write those 3 exams. So if you signed up for the course in April and you're writing in September, I'd say, please choose version 2. You already missed the 3 exams. You can write them in July. That's it. Okay. For May, we only have 1 version. There's no choice. It doesn't matter. You sign up for May. That's it. So this is not a big deal. Like I say, you're never restricted to anything. Okay. Like I didn't even mention that, like the videos and all that. You're not restricted to anything. There's no maximums. There's no limits on anything here. So our goal is just to have you pass. Okay, so whatever. We just have these 2 versions and we try and encourage you to write the cases earlier in January, February, March. 3 of them, that's all. Any questions on this? Everyone good? Okay, so Michael's already said this. Basically, as I keep saying, starting early is just good. Okay, it doesn't really impact us, but it really is more from your sake. You know, as Michael said, we've got people now, I don't know, writing in May and writing in September. That's fine. Canadian students take like 1.5 years or 2 years to get through the whole process. You're lucky you don't have to write all those exams. But starting now, 1 year away for next September, great. And I will tell you, I don't care when the classes live online start. That may sound funny, but it's not really funny because you're doing self-study. We start the classes in November for May. We start the classes in January for September. I say to everyone, I don't care when the classes start. We start you studying right away. You get the technical binder immediately. You start watching the videos. You start studying technical. You sign up now. Well, I don't care. You're writing in May or September. You start studying. Then the classes will start at some point. But it doesn't really matter when the classes start because you could do so much studying of all that technical and even the practice case writing that you mark yourself. You could do that anytime. Anytime before the classes start. So starting early is good. At some point, we have to start the classes, obviously. So we pick November, we pick January for September. That's all. All right, everyone good? Now, you can work full-time. I don't remember if Michael said this or not, but you can work full-time, people. This is not a full-time thing. 10, 15 hours a week is good. That would be good. I'd be happy with that. Working full-time and anywhere you live also, obviously it makes no difference if you live in Canada, if you're in India, wherever you are, it doesn't matter. Okay. You could do the entire program. You have to come to Canada for 3 days to write, but other than that, you can live anywhere. Okay. Questions? All right. So I'm not going to sit and read these. Basically, we do have a lot of testimonials on the website, many from Indian students, many from Canadian students, whatever. You can kind of read that and just get a feel for what people have been saying. As I said, they're very good, like, oh, you know, they're good. I mean, the program is working, so people are happy. And I think they appreciate, especially people from a very different background in India. I think they appreciate, you know what I mean, like how much we put into it. And again, there's a lot here. But, you know, I think we both think it's necessary, but it's good. So anyway, you can kind of look at these, whatchamacallit, you can just look at these testimonials and see, I just kind of threw 3 into the PowerPoint presentation. Whatever, you can kind of look at those. And we have lots more if you want, like on the website. Okay, now, important piece, let me just explain a few things about registration and stuff. So the way this works is that you register with the province you think you're going to write the exam in. So if I'm going to write the exam in Ontario, I register in Ontario. If I'm going to write the exam in British Columbia, I register with British Columbia. It's one exam across Canada, the same exam. Nobody really cares where you write. I could live in British Columbia, fly to Ontario a day before the exam, spend 3 days in Ontario and write the exam, and fly back to my home in British Columbia. Perfectly fine. Nobody cares. The only thing they care about is that if I did that, it was because I was registered as a student in Ontario. So most people register in the province they think they're going to live. But if you came here on a visitor visa, it doesn't really matter where you write, although there is something about the visitor visa I'll mention afterwards. You write in Ontario, but theoretically you could write in any province, wherever you're registered with, and you'd be 3 days in that province and then you'd leave. Okay, so that's a story about registering, like with the institute. Now, let me explain the fees and stuff. So what we do is we give a 50% discount for people that are registered with the ICAI in Toronto. We also give the discount if you're not going to register with the ICAI in Toronto if you're living in India. So we give a 15% discount. Now, there are 3 options with respect to paying. It's really kind of, we probably complicate life here a little bit. It's really option 1 and option 3, because nobody does option 2. Okay, so it's really option 1 and option 3. Let me explain the options, and this ties into Capstone too. Obviously, please stop me if you have questions. All right. Option 1, the full price of the course is $27.95. This is all Canadian dollars. We give a 15% discount, so it's $23.75. We ask that you purchase the Capstone 2 material. That costs $250. So this is the total. Now, 7 weeks before, or actually, I don't know, about maybe 8 weeks before the CFE, I send an email, and that's when I tell everyone to buy the Capstone 2 material. You don't have to buy this. It's optional, but you're going to buy it probably because you want it. So you buy the material, it costs $250. You buy it from the Institute, not from us. What you're doing is buying the practice cases with detailed marking guides. In option 1, we are going to mark those Capstone 2 cases. So for 7 weeks, every week, leading up to the CFE, whether it's May or September, you're going to write a case, hand it in, we're going to mark it, give it back. That is effectively Capstone 2. Option 1, we've effectively incorporated Capstone 2 into the course. We call that the alternative course for students not attending Capstone 1 and 2. We have built that in. Essentially, the price is $800 minus 15%. You can do the math. That is option 1. We recommend this because you get more feedback on your cases. Most people choose option 1. I don't know, probably 10, 15% choose option 3.
Can I just add just one point just to make it clear? As you can see from our slide, the dollars are Canadian. I think many people, when they think of dollars, think in terms of the US dollar. So I just want to bring it to your attention. The Canadian dollar is very weak right now. It is the exchange rate is $1.35 to it basically it costs $1.35 Canadian for $1 US dollar. So if you're thinking in terms of US dollars, this price is actually less than $2,000. In US dollars, it's only $1,945. So I just wanted to add that for those of you who think in terms of those of you who are in India and maybe thinking in US dollars. I realize those of you in Canada thinking Canadian dollars. Sorry, Aaron, for the interruption.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Okay, that's good. Okay, so any questions on option 1? Okay, people, option 2, I'm just going to, in like 2 sentences, okay? Basically, again, I don't know who does this, but essentially this is where you would take our course for the $19.95 minus the same 15% discount, and then you would go to Capstone 1 and 2, because it's optional for people with Indian CAs. You would go to Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. So of course that's more expensive because now you're paying CPA another $1,300, $1,400 for each of Capstone 1 and 2. As I said before, we don't even recommend you go to Capstone 1. So this is rare. The only time this happens, the only time that I know of that this has happened in the past is when a student is working for a firm and the firm pays and forces them to go to Capstone 1 and 2. We've had the odd situation like that. Nobody does this on their own. But if you're working for a firm and you have no choice and the firm says, look, we're paying, you're going to Capstone 1 and 2, okay. Then you do option 2 and you don't pay us $27.95 minus 50%, you pay us $19.95 minus 15%. Okay, so again, rare option 2. Now, option 3 is kind of the opposite of option 1. You take the course, $19.95 minus 15%, $16.95. You buy the Capstone 2 material. But when I send that email and I say buy the Capstone 2 material, which again, you don't have to do, but you're going to want to do, so you probably will do that. You say, thank you very much. I'm not going to give you the Capstone 2 cases to mark. I'll mark them myself. If that's the case, I'm not going to charge you $800 minus 15% to mark the cases. So your fee is just going to be the $16.95 plus the $250. That's it. And you would mark the Capstone 2 cases. It's basically a volume difference between option 1 and option 3. By volume difference, I mean how many cases we mark. In option 1, including the Capstone 2 cases, there's about, I don't know, 22, 23 cases. In option 3, where we don't mark the Capstone 2 cases, there's about half. We're still marking cases. We'd never give you a program without marking cases, but not nearly as many. So, people, we do recommend option 1 because we know it's better if you get more feedback on the cases and you write more cases. We definitely don't recommend option 2 where you go to Capstone 1 and 2. So option 3 is really for people that say, look, I can't do it. It's too expensive, option 1. So then they do option 3. It's still a totally viable option. You just don't get as much feedback on the cases. Now, we try and make it easier for you by accepting credit cards and installment plans. And we're very flexible on the installment plans. It's based on your cash flow. There's no interest. The way it basically works is when you register, you don't pay anything, and then you send the installment information in a follow-up email. So regardless of the option, it's the same thing, credit card and installment plans. And we're very nice on the installment plans because it really is flexible. So most people choose option 1, but some people, I don't know, they want to choose option 3, and that's also fine. Any questions? on the payment stuff. Okay, so as Michael mentioned, people, look, it's all Canadian dollars. This is the whole thing of how much the whole thing costs. This is option one, the $26.25. You pay some registration fee to the institute. I don't know, your annual student fee is approximately that. And the CFE fee for the exam itself is about $1,700. So if you're in Canada, you're looking at about 5,000 Canadian dollars. If you're not in Canada, you're looking at the flight to come into Canada to write the exam. And you can just translate and you can see from Canadian to US. That is kind of your whole expenditure. So it is what it is. I don't know, is that a lot? Is that not a lot? You know, a lot of people from India end up going into, when they come here, they go into some program, university or something like that, because that's one of the ways they get to Canada. And they're spending, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, 14, $15,000 in those programs. So compared to that, I don't know, it's not so bad. But, you know, we've tried our best to really put in as much as we can and keep the costs as low as we can. Okay, any questions? All right, the people, just to kind of finish off, registration with CPA before we have a student who will just give you a few minutes, talk about what he did. All right, so I've already mentioned this. You have to write in the province. You write in the province basically that you register with. Now, what I did not mention is timing. So, people, this is important. If you're writing in May, you should be registering now. Okay, September, October, you should be registering now. Do not wait till January. The institutes are very slow, especially Ontario. They take 8 to 12 weeks to register you. They're very slow. So if you're writing in May, don't wait till January, play it safe, register sometime around now, whatever, in the fall. But if you're writing in September, don't register till January, because you could be charged an extra fee for registering in the last 6 months of the year, and that's kind of useless. January is fine for September. It's not a problem. Okay, that's fine. So I don't know, I don't even know if there is an official deadline date about when you register with the Institute, but again, Ontario is slower, they're faster out west. It is what it is. Just, you know, you should definitely contact the Institute if you're not sure about, you know what I mean, like when to register. But what I'm telling you is basically correct here. You know, you're doing it in May. You should move on this and get registered. Once you get your name into the system, you're okay. Once your name is in the system, you're going to be okay to write. You know what I mean? Like to write, you should be fine. Even if they take 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever, they go back and forth. We don't really get involved in the registration process. I often get asked that question, can I help with the registration process? To be honest, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of my time. It's not going to help you anyway. It's all this stuff is confidential. We don't even see it. Bottom line is, we are not worried, because as long as you have a CA from India, you will be able to register. It is not a problem. And people, a very important point. It doesn't matter to us when you register. Many people start our program before they register. So you might be thinking, oh, well, 1 second, I'm going to start the program, and then what if something happens and I can't register with the Institute? I don't think we've ever had that happen with one student. Because again, as long as you have a CA from India, you will be fine. Now, if you miss a deadline, okay, that I can't help. But as long as you do it in time, it is not a problem. So no one should be worried. I don't know when people register with the Institute. As Michael mentioned, as I mentioned, we've got students now writing in September next year. I tell them not to register with the Institute until January. Who cares? They're studying now. We give them all the stuff. They're in the course, and they'll register at some point with the Institute, and it's not a problem. As long as you have a CA from India. Any questions on that? There's a point I just said. You do not have to be registered with the Institute to start PASS. Okay, I've already mentioned this. You can work anywhere or practice anywhere. Again, you just have to write in the province that you register, and that's it. That's all. Here's some useful links. Again, when you get the PowerPoint presentation, you want to go into these links in Ontario. Here's some useful links for the Western School of Business. Okay, now, Michael mentioned, people, just for my little piece to kind of finish off, with immigration, we don't really get into immigration. This is just the very basics. 4 ways to write this exam. You can see tourist, study, work visa, or PR. Study visa, we think, is the most preferred method today. This has changed over the years. Getting a PR might be harder, maybe it's a little easier. I don't know. Like I say, we're really not trying to give information on this. And in fact, we actually work a little bit with someone who does this and is an expert in this. Okay, Vaibhav, basically that is the email. If you want to have a paid consultation, if you're not in Canada and you want a paid consultation, if you're in India listening to this, by all means contact Vaibhav, and he can give you a lot more detail rather than me and Michael kind of fudging this because we don't really know this. Okay, and this obviously only applies to people that are not in Canada.
I'd like to now introduce a former student of PASS, Dhruv Ghai, who was successful on his CV the very first try. What he's going to do, he's going to share with you his experience in preparing for this exam. He'll share with you the challenges he faced and how he dealt with them and how he was able to be successful on the CP. I think you'll find his presentation very helpful.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you, Michael. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all the people who have joined this call. Not sure in which time zone you all are. Just to give you a brief introduction about myself, my name is Dhruv. I'm an ex-student of PASS, former student of PASS for the CPA. I'm an Indian CA. Currently, I'm working with RioCan Real Estate Investment Trust as a Director of Development Accounting. So just to start off with this, I see all of you are aspirants for the CFE, the CPA, Canada. And, I'll start off with this, the exam pattern. So, we are all used to studying as per the Indian CA curriculum and all. The exam pattern of the CPA, it's entirely different. We used to go into the details on our CA side. In the CFE, it tests you on the technical side, but along with that, it tests you on your case writing skills. You need to present what your technical knowledge is. So yes, it's a doable exam, as Ira and Michael, must have walked you through the technical parts of it. With the right guidance, the right approach, it is 100% doable exam. I did it in the first go. But you need to have the right approach to it, the right study pattern to it. You need to understand what to do, how to do it. If you crack those things, then trust me, it's not that difficult. As you might have heard from a lot of people, that it's a very tough exam, and you need to spend sleepless nights for it. It's not that. Going on to the second thing, it is different from what we are doing in India for our CA, because what we are doing is we're just doing the technical part. We don't have the case writing skills in that. We don't actually do, we are not given a thinking logical background to it. So what happens here is you'll be given a case. They put you in an actual scenario, in an actual situation. So they want you to think, they want you to analyze, if you are there at that very moment, how you're going to take it through. So that's the biggest challenge that Indian CAs face, because back in our home countries, we are not kind of used to doing that thing. So that's the biggest change. But it happens. Once you write the first case,
The second case, so eventually you'll see, oh, the first one will be like, oh, wow, how do I do it? I'm not able to think, how do I approach it? But as you get into the practice of writing, a couple more cases, your brain, your analytical skills, they start thinking the same way. So the key is write more cases, review each and every case that you have written. Once you get it back marked, once you get the answer copy of it, review it, decode it, debrief it thoroughly, because that's the main learning approach. Once as you're debriefing your case, debriefing is basically once you write and you submit it, the past instructors are going to mark it and you're going to get it back, and you're going to get comments to it, and then they're going to give you an answer copy to it, like the perfect ideal solution. Debrief it, like go in detail of what you have written, what has got marked, and go by it point by point. That becomes your revision guide. You revise what you have done on that case. You get to learn from your mistakes. What were the mistakes that you don't have to repeat? Very important aspect. In my case, I did pass. I got the reference of pass from one of my friends. They did it in the first go. They told me go to pass. I did my own research, but after speaking with the ERA, I found that pass was much more suited to me, so I joined pass. The first thing about pass, ERA and Michael, they are like reachable like there is no tomorrow. You guys can just email it to them and you'll hear it back. Like the max time it took me was like a couple of hours. They are like the max within a day you'll get your answer back, like for any queries, any questions that you have. Very supportive, very knowledgeable. The materials that they provide, oh, that's fantastic. You just don't need to wrap your brains around anything anywhere else, that oh, what, I have this material, but you know what, let me just do something else. Just let me check some materials from a friend. You don't need to do that. Just stick to the past material and you'll be through it. Listen to what they advise you during the lectures, during the classes, the tips and the techniques they tell you, because those come in really, really, really handy when you're preparing for exams. Like that is the crux part of it. Do practice cases as much as you can. They'll get it marked for you depending on which plan you have chosen with pass. My recommendation is choose the plan wherein you can get all your capstone cases marked. You get other cases marked, but again, it depends on person to person. Their instructors, the markers are really good. Pass arranges for a one-on-one session with the marker who has marked your cases. That is excellent. That marker will be like just with you one-on-one on a Zoom call, like that was back in the COVID days. I'm not sure how the arrangement is now, but in my case, we were on one-on-one Zoom call. So you just talk to the person, they tell you why they marked you what were the lackings that they found in your answers, what could be improved, how you can improve it. And you get to hear it directly from the horse's mouth, in the sense that the person who has checked your case is telling you what it could be, to achieve better. So that's very good. With pass, the best part I found was the material was thorough. Like I didn't need to, like as I mentioned before, I didn't need to went back to any other thing. I just took the past material, the past guidelines, and it was perfect. I didn't had any issues, and do a lot of cases. Just touching a point that I heard on the call from the Toronto chapter of ICI regarding day one case. So pass gives you 2 practice cases for day one. That was back in when I did it. I'm not sure how it is now, but those are more than enough. If you do them thoroughly, like those 2 scenarios, it's more than enough, because day one, it's not at all technical. It just needs you to present the case facts in a logical presentation manner. They are looking for a report writing kind of a thing, and pass prepares you for that like perfectly. They will give you the gist, the main pointers of the entire case, which is if you go through that case, it's more than a 50 pager. So they'll give you the pointers in 1 or 2 pages. You get all those pointers, and then you practice the 2 cases that they give you for day 1, and you'll be done. Like, to me, honestly, you don't need to go beyond anything that PASS is providing you, because I've seen it with me and a couple of other friends of mine who took PASS, and we were all through without referring to any other material. Okay, many of you might have a question saying, I'm working full time. How much time do I need to devote to it? Will it be able to possible to clear the exam? I was working full time. I was working in Canada full time. Working in India and working in Canada are 2 separate stories. In India, you have a lot of help for all other household things. In Canada, you don't. Unfortunately, you don't. So I managed those entire things. I am married. I had a family to take care of. I had a full-time job to attend to, and then I had to study. I did all that, and I think I just took a 2 weeks break from my work just before the exams to do a final revision and sit for the exams. So yes, it's very doable. You just need to have a right schedule, a right study approach, a right study pattern on how you want to do it. If you have all those things in place and if you're dedicated, it's no problem. Like, the biggest challenge that Indian CAs would face is, like, we are not kind of habitual of sitting for 5 hours and writing cases. You need to get into that understanding, you need to get into that habit, and that will only come when you're dedicated to it and when you practice more and more cases. So practice as much cases as you can, and you're just going to be fine. The biggest advantage of doing CPA Canada is, I was very well settled in my job. But as soon as I did CPA, I'll not be lying about it. It opens a hell lot of opportunities for you. Pardon my language, but you market yourself like there is no tomorrow. People, consider Indian CAs worthy, credible, but you are still an Indian CA. You don't have a Canadian degree added to your belt. A feather to the cap is what they need. As soon as you're CPA, it gives a lot of worthiness, a lot of credibleness to your whole resume. And trust me, it will open a lot of opportunities for you in the market. If you are in your current job, it will give you opportunities to grow up. It can give you opportunities to diversify. Once you do the CPA, it might happen that you think, okay, I'm on the taxation side, but I somehow found assurance more interesting. It can give you new opportunities, new doors, so that's a very big advantage of doing it. It's a great learning spree. It opens up good opportunities for you, and it's an excellent degree to have. As you could see on the back wall of mine, the one degree is the CA India membership certificate. The other one is the Canadian CPA. And honestly, I'm very proud to have both of these. And I would really like to thank Ira, Michael, and the entire PASS team, for helping me achieve this. It's a proud honor. And again, thank you so much for letting me share my experience and giving me this opportunity. That is it from my end. Any of you, if you have any questions to ask, please feel free.
Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question regarding day 2 exam.
Sure.
Yeah, suppose I choose assurance as my elective. So is it necessary for me to address the questions relating to other competencies like finance or tax, or I can skip it?
No. Yeah, I can just quickly answer that. On day 2, everybody has to address the required financial accounting and management accounting. In addition, you only deal with the role. So if you do assurance on day 2, there will be nothing to address for finance, governance, or tax. So the maximum number of competencies, there's 6 in total. The maximum number of competencies is 3 for everybody. Everyone has financial accounting and/or management accounting. And the third one is the one that you choose. So that's day 2. On day 3, all questions could have all of them, or 5 out of 6, or 4 out of 6. So you have to know all 6 areas. But on day 2, no. There are 3 areas for everybody that will not be coming up at all, and you will not be addressing those at all.
Thank you so much.
So it looks like there aren't any further questions. So I just want to thank Drew for his wonderful presentation. I hope everybody found it helpful.
Okay, so we give you in the, as I said before, we give you contact information because we really are always answering questions from students. So this is our contact information. This is our email. You can see WhatsApp, whatever, however you want to reach us, doesn't really matter. Okay, so we are available to answer questions. We do understand that, it's a different process, and people, and people are unfamiliar with the process, and therefore we give a lot of guidance. We do give a lot of guidance. You'll see us throughout the program, and there's 2 of us, which helps. So that's also good. But, you can feel free to ask questions. You watch a video, you don't understand something, or you want us to look at a study plan or something like that. It's not a problem. A number of takeaways. Here's like 4 important takeaways from this whole session. So number 1, as Michael was saying, it's a little bit of an uncertain time at the moment. We know there's a CFE in 2024. Okay, we think there may be in 2025. But it starts to get risky into 2025, because that is the year they're saying they're going to change the whole system. And the transition is very unclear. That's the problem. So if you write in 2024, we know if unfortunately you're unsuccessful, you'll be able to write the CFE 2025 as a repeat writer. The uncertainty is how many CFEs are they going to keep going to let you write as a first-time writer? That's the risk. You want to write 2024, May or September? No problem. 2025? Question mark. We don't know. And the MOU, who the heck knows what's going to happen with the MOU? As Michael said, we don't even know the exact format of these exams for Canadians. No idea how the MOU is going to look like. So it's very uncertain. So, if you're really considering this seriously, or if you have friends that are considering it seriously, we believe there is enough time now, no problem at all from a study time perspective for either May or September. You're not too late. We're catching you. We're doing this purposely in the fall now. So there's more than enough time to gear up for this and write in 2024. And as we said, point number 2, you can do this totally while you work full time. You can do it in India. You could do it anywhere. You could do it in Canada, Middle East. Doesn't really matter where you are in the world. We tried to stress point number 3. You want to start cases as early as possible. Practice is important. Practice is very important. So starting early is just very, very useful. And look, the technical review, you don't need perfect technical. I don't think I mentioned this point. I'm not sure if Michael did or not, but it is actually an open book exam. You actually have the handbook, which has all the financial accounting standards and the auditing standards. That is open book. And you also have the Tax Act, which is kind of useless. That is also open book. Nothing else. So that can help a lot. We go through that. We talk about the handbook when we get into the technical sessions and things like that. But it still involves learning the technical. Just because it's open handbook, you're under time constraints. Your time is limited. So yes, you can look up stuff in the handbook, absolutely. But you just got to be more familiar with the, the more familiar you are with the handbook, obviously the better. Okay, questions? People, any questions? Let's see if Dhruv has joined. Yes. Okay, Dhruv is here. Okay, any questions? I'll come back at the end, but I just want to know if any questions right now before I introduce Dhruv.
Yeah, one question from my side.
Yep.
So generally, I've spoken with my colleagues and friends who have given CFE. They have noticed that with practice from notes from your side and videos, they are well equipped to prepare for day 2 and day 3. But sometimes they feel that day 1 is little difficult because it's not really technical, and it requires a different mindset. So if you can share some insights on how to prepare for day 1.
Okay, so all right, it's a very good question. So people, look, for day 1, the first thing I would say is that it does involve a lot less studying. We do 3 things. The second thing I would say is we do 3 things to prepare you for day 1. Number 1, we have a class on how to write day 1. We record it like we do all the other classes. Number 2, we give you a handout of things to remember from the day 1 case. They give a case in day 1, it's like 50 pages long. We summarize and give you a handout of what you should remember. Number 3, when you purchase probably the Capstone 2 material, those are past cases. In that material, there was 2 practice day 1 cases. If you choose option 1 with us and we're marking those cases, we will mark those 2 cases. You will write them as practice cases leading up to the CFE in the last 7 weeks. We will mark them. If you don't choose option 1, you choose option 3, then at least you have those cases to write on your own. Those are the 3 things we really do for day 1. The only other thing you could do that I've suggested to some people, which you could do for day 1, but this is already point number 4, and I don't know how many people do this. You could always look back at different day 1 cases in the CFEs. That's all free. You can look at that and you can kind of see what the question is and what their perfect solution is to get more of a feel for day 1. That would be self-study. You would just look back. You don't want to write those because they're based on a different company. So that's going to be a waste of time. You don't want to sit there 4 hours writing a different day 1 company. But you want to look at them and get more of a feel, fine. So we find that, we know it's very different, but it needs a lot less studying. And we find that those 3 things, or I guess if you want to throw in the 4th one also, that people do should be sufficient for day 1, which they mark separately. Does that answer?
Yep. Yeah, thanks. And just a follow-up question. So people who are writing in May or September next year, so this day 1 case will continue from this year, or it will be a new case altogether?
Yeah, okay, it's very good. It's very confusing. It will be a different day 1. People, what they do is each year they have like a new case, each CFE, and then they give it a second time, call that version 2. That's what they call it. So if I'm writing in May first time, I'm going to get a new case. I've never seen it yet. Okay, there's going to be a new case for May, call it version 1. In September, you will not be able to write version 2 for that case. They will purposely say next May, if you fail this May, the next May you could write version 2. But if you're writing September, you got a different case. And that's because they don't like to encourage people to write from May to September. So they're not going to give you the May and September. But in September, that case, I don't even remember now, will it be written in May? I don't even remember now if that version will be in May or the following September. So the bottom line is, if you fail day 1, you have a chance to write the same company a second time. But you know what? It's your option. It's your option. If you fail in May and you want to write in September, you're allowed to do that. They try to discourage it because there's very little time, but you are allowed to do it, and you could just learn a different case, which, by the way, is not the biggest deal in the world. It is not the biggest deal in the world, quite frankly. Okay, you might have to take a few more hours just to start looking at a different case, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. People do it, but other people, okay, they're writing a second time, and it happened to be the version 2. Then you stick with that. You stick with that same case.